Kettering, Ohio, 1953. A recently widowed Barbara Moore stands alone in her kitchen, emotionally unable to make dinner for her children. Her late husband, a theoretical physicist, had been performing research at the nearby Air Force Base until his car was found on the side of the road, his body inexplicably covered in subcutaneous burns. A knock at the door breaks the silence. Barbara answers to find a stranger, but there's something about the man that's undeniably off, and the questions he's come to ask about her husband and his work will open a door Barbara wished had remained closed. I've discovered something inside an abandoned apartment. According to my friend, whose landlord owns the garage the apartment sits on, the previous tenant left without paying rent, leaving a lot behind. Most notably, the boxes. And not the moving kind. This was someone's archive. The contents describe countless unexplained, strange, and disturbing events, some spanning back centuries. Without a trace of involvement from law enforcement, all of this appears to be the work of a private investigator. Most of it refers to actual documentation, carefully preserved. Why would someone leave all of this behind? Is it all an elaborate hoax? Regardless, I think it's worth sharing. So that's what this channel is. So sit back and take a look for yourself as I tell you about a case file I like to call The Stranger at the Doorstep. After World War II, security and prosperity swept the nation, a feeling soon to be overshadowed by a new global reality as the Cold War crept in. By 1953, Donovan and Barbara Moore had built a life together in Kettering, Ohio, near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he participated in a secretive research endeavor, the details of which are not entirely known. What we do know about Donovan's work, as well as his inexplicable demise and the strange events that followed, all come from a 6-page investigator's report found in the case file. As with all of these case files, the investigator's name and who they worked for are not known. The majority of the report serves as analysis of an interview conducted with his wife. The report tells us that at first Barbara was very reluctant to speak with the investigator, as she believed that ever since her husband's passing, her home had been watched by ambiguous parties. While it appears true that the investigator had no affiliations with the people she describes, he still lies to her, claiming to be a journalist. In fact, the investigator seems to already know quite a bit about the Moores, as he indicates in the report, stating,
"It should be noted that the surveillance tactics observed are not conducted by our operatives."
After graduating from MIT in 1943, Donovan Moore, a young theoretical physicist, was recruited to join Operation High Jump in the Antarctic. While ostensibly Operation High Jump aimed to train personnel and test equipment in frigid conditions, according to the investigator's report, Moore's research in the region focused on
unexplained atmospheric and geophysical phenomena.
These experiences during Operation High Jump eventually led to a distinguished position on a classified government project known as Project Ether, located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. While the nature of Moore's work is never made entirely clear, apparently it involved
harnessing and understanding some previously unidentified resonance, underpinning the fabric of physical reality.
whatever Moore's work with Project Ether discovered, whatever this resonance and its applications might be. It was something entirely unknown to physics at the time, and perhaps still undisclosed to this day. But Donovan Moore's work on Project Ether would be short-lived. Barbara's recollection paints a picture of a man grappling with paranoia and depression. Donovan would take a leave of absence from Project Ether sometime in 1953. Only a few weeks later, Donovan Moore's body would be found. Before leaving the project, Barbara noticed he started altering his route to work, which he dismissed as
a mere change of preference.
And then there's the nights spent in introspection under the stars.
Mrs. Moore vividly describes scenes of her husband spending long hours in the backyard in solitude at night, either peering through his telescope or lying on the grass, often accompanied by a bottle of alcohol. He found solace in the stars. There was a comfort he found there that he couldn't find anywhere else. It became a concern when she observed him doing this amidst a torrential rain.
In this chapter of Donovan's life, contemplating the edge of scientific frontier fades into a vast, unknown dread, a journey Donovan feels he must tread alone. What was it that so unsettled Donovan Moore? Not long after his departure, Donovan began to believe he was being followed.
His initial concerns about government surveillance, a plausible aftermath for anyone involved with clandestine projects, have evolved into fears of more elusive individuals.
When Barbara Moore told her husband to take the weekend away, she had no idea it would be the last time she'd ever see him. On the night of May 2nd, 1953, Donovan headed toward his favorite fishing spot, his reels and tackle in tow. Perhaps he felt some relief, some freedom, hoping to leave his anxieties behind. Perhaps his anxieties followed him, or something followed him. A week later, his car was found heading north in the direction of the fishing spot, as if he was interrupted before he could even get there. This may have been the investigator's conclusion as well, had it not been for what else was found in the vehicle.
2 buckets of fish, several days rotten.
If Donovan had in fact completed his fishing trip, why did the direction of his car suggest he was heading toward the fishing spot? They found Donovan with his eyes open,
staring towards the sky,
his body showing
inexplicable amounts of subcutaneous tissue damage, similar to burns, but his clothes were untouched.
His clothes apparently showed no signs of combustion or heat damage of any kind. The investigator also notes
all reference to tissue damage, subcutaneous or otherwise, is absent.
What could cause something like this without any other sign of burning? Subcutaneous suggests below the skin, as in cooked from within. And to cap it all off, the official cause of death, a heart attack. The questionable cause of death, the unusual tissue damage, the fish in the trunk in contrast to the direction of his vehicle. Something about this wasn't right, and no one was more plagued by it than Barbara Moore. Barbara's troubles did not end there. In the weeks that followed, she and her family began experiencing a series of strange occurrences, eerily reminiscent of those reported by her husband before his death. She discovered burnt patches of grass in unrecognizable patterns that she described as squiggles and lines. Inexplicably, lights flickered in the house, with electricians unable to find the cause. Mysteriously, items would disappear and reappear within the home, even items that were not her own. The children, too, experienced odd events. Mrs. Moore recounted how they often heard tapping on the windows at night and felt something moving beneath the house. She tried to reassure them it was just raccoons, a belief she held despite sometimes agreeing
it sounded too large to be a raccoon.
Then, of course, Barbara too reported feeling watched, often noticing unfamiliar cars parked nearby. An interesting note from the investigator underlines the severity of these occurrences, stating that the surveillance-like observations were not by our operatives, and were likely an intentional plot to intimidate and harass Mrs. Moore. One peculiar incident adds some weight to Barbara's claim. On the day of the interview with the investigator, a strange, high-pitched noise emerged from the kitchen. Despite efforts to locate its source, it remained elusive, seemingly moving room to room. Both Barbara and the interviewer chose to overlook this anomaly. On their own, each of these occurrences could be dismissed in one way or another, but at this point in the interview, Barbara describes an encounter she could no longer ignore. On Tuesday, July 14th, a stranger knocked on her door. This singular visit, occurring just 2 months after her husband's death, left an indelible mark on her. She paints a picture of someone or something far from ordinary. The stranger claimed to be an old friend of her husband. Barbara noted he had a peculiar look about him, claiming,
"His eyes were like nothing I've seen, never blinking, and his speech, it was devoid of any emotion."
Unnaturally pale in a boxy brown, ill-fitted suit, a hat that seemed to purposely cast a shadow over his bizarre features. She described it as somewhere between a government agent and a professor. The most striking features were his eyes, small, black pupils. She described his speech as lacking inflection, as if
"You were mimicking human conversation."
The man chose to sit in the darkest corner of the room.
Mrs. Moore mentioned he requested something to drink, which he received but never touched, as if it were a mere formality rather than a genuine request.
The stranger never gives his name. In the report, the investigator assigns him an acronym: N.I.O. Throughout their interaction, the N.I.O.'s behavior was marked by eccentricities. He would interrupt his own line of questioning with seemingly scripted social formalities, like asking to use the bathroom, only to stand inside the bathroom without closing the door, and then return to his seat, resuming his interrogation. His comments on the weather and random compliments about the house appeared out of place, further adding to the surreal nature of the encounter.
It was as if he was playing at being a person.
Mrs. Moore attempted to recall the questions the N.I.O. asked. She mentioned that he asked about her husband's research, particularly in theoretical physics. He also seemed interested in whether her husband ever felt like he was being watched or monitored, especially following his involvement in certain sensitive projects. The N.I.O.'s questions then shifted towards Mrs. Moore herself, asking about her own understanding or background in physics or any related scientific fields. Finally, he seemed keen to know if there were any personal notes or documents left by her husband that could shed light on his theoretical work. Mrs. Moore noted these questions as being rather specific, yet felt they were asked in a way that seemed disconnected from genuine curiosity. During the tense meeting, the N.I.O. pauses, directing Barbara's attention towards the hallway. There, a light begins to shimmer with an intensity and pattern unlike anything Barbara has seen before. It grows brighter, pulsating with energy. It seems to warp the space around it. The N.I.O. observes quietly. Then, just as the light reaches a crescendo of brightness, it fades into nothingness. In the silence that follows, the N.I.O. comments,
"Light is subject to forces unseen and often unexplained."
The N.I.O. asks how her husband died. She mentions the heart attack. He continues,
"What is unseen can leave impressions, like the burns on Mr. Worskin."
The implication is clear. The N.I.O. knows more about Donovan's death than he lets on. Barbara tells the man to leave. He does not protest, but has a final message.
"Leave it to rest with your husband."
The investigator asks what she thinks he means. Barbara doesn't have an answer, and the investigator does not push further. Who is this N.I.O.? What does the strange three-letter acronym really mean? And why was it used? Within the report, the investigator introduces the term in a side note.
"It's the opinion of this investigator that this individual meets the criteria for an N.I.O. in accordance with..."
Redacted. Meets the criteria in accordance with something. Like everywhere else in these files, anything having to do with a group or organization or clients of the investigator are redacted. And I can't help but wonder, have they encountered these strange characters, these N.I.O.s, before? Because the way it's phrased, it's almost as if their appearance is nothing new. Maybe even expected. What did this N.I.O. want with Barbara? Were its questions seeking information, or was its goal simply to deliver a warning? If a warning, then a warning about what? At this point, there's an obvious question I have to ask. What if the figure known as the N.I.O. isn't even human? Perhaps this N.I.O. is acting as an intermediary, an enforcer of some sort of universal checks and balances beyond our understanding. Despite the N.I.O.'s presence feeling intimidating, he didn't outright threaten Barbara. Instead, he hinted that if Barbara follows in Donovan's footsteps, she might end up with the same tragic outcome. I'd be remiss to mention the similarities between the N.I.O. and what is commonly known as the Men in Black. Similar tales of men in black suits inquisitively visiting strangers, leaving threatening impressions. Though clad in brown rather than black, their unsettling actions are strikingly similar. Whatever they are, they either pose a significant risk to the investigator and whoever they work for, or it leads to another avenue of discovery. In these files, so far clear conclusions are often elusive. And this one is no different. As I piece together Barbara's account with what little of the report allows us to decipher about Donovan's work, it became increasingly evident that his leave of absence from Project Ether was not a simple matter of professional burnout or personal choice. It was perhaps a response to the overwhelming nature of what he had discovered or encountered, a response to the very edge of human understanding and beyond. This, coupled with the ongoing interest of the N.I.O. and Barbara, suggested that the implications of Donovan's work were far-reaching, touching upon areas of science and reality that were still largely unexplored and potentially dangerous. Their tale is not just one of scientific curiosity, but a reminder of the delicate balance between discovery and the unknown risks it brings. These questions feel strangely relevant to me as I pore through these files. What exactly am I stepping into? They just might be intrusive thoughts, but there's that darker part of my mind that insists this might be more than I bargained for. Thank you for watching.